My name is Carol. I'm 70 years old, and at my own retirement party, I watched my daughter-in-law try to murder me. Before I tell you how this all ended with police sirens and handcuffs, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It was supposed to be the beginning of my golden years. After 40 years of pouring my heart and soul into a tech company I built from the ground up after my husband passed, I had finally sold it. $25 million. The number still felt unreal. All I wanted was a quiet life in my Scottsdale home, maybe travel a little and spoil my granddaughter Chloe. But my son Kevin and his wife Tiffany insisted on a party. "Mom, you deserve it," Kevin had said, his voice oozing with a sincerity that I now realize was pure performance. "Let Tiffany handle everything. You just relax." Relax. I should have known something was wrong right then. Tiffany, a woman who considered loading the dishwasher a Herculean effort, was suddenly Martha Stewart on steroids. She was arranging flowers, polishing silverware, and buzzing around my kitchen with a terrifying level of enthusiasm. It was a beautiful party, I'll give her that. The Arizona sunset was painting the sky in shades of orange and pink behind the floor-to-ceiling windows of my living room. About 30 people were mingling, laughing, drinking champagne. It all looked perfect. Too perfect. I was making small talk with my former business partner when I saw it. The toast was about to begin. Tiffany was standing near the champagne table, her back mostly to the room. She thought no one was looking, but the mirror on the far wall gave me a perfect unobstructed view. My blood didn't just run cold. It turned to a solid block of ice in my veins. She glanced around, a quick, furtive movement, before pulling a small dark glass vial from her designer clutch. Her hand was shaking just slightly as she uncapped it and tipped its contents into a single champagne flute. Not just any flute. My flute. The one with a tiny, almost invisible chip on the rim that I always used. She knew it was mine. Now, a normal person might have screamed. They might have pointed a finger and shouted, "Poisoner!" They might have called the police right then and there. But you don't survive in the tech world for 40 years by panicking. You survive by outthinking the snakes in the boardroom, and I had a feeling the snake in my living room was far more dangerous. My mind went into overdrive, cold and clear. Don't react. Don't let her know you saw. A moment later she turned around, her face a perfect mask of daughterly affection. She picked up 2 glasses, one for her, one for me, and started walking towards me. "Carol," she said, her voice as smooth as silk, "I thought you could use a refill before the toast. You've earned this." She offered me the poison glass, a bright, fake smile plastered on her face. I took it from her, my own smile just as warm, just as fake. "Thank you, dear. That's so thoughtful." My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, but my hand was steady. I held the glass, the cool crystal a stark contrast to the fire of rage and terror burning inside me. I had to do something, and I had to do it now. My eyes scanned the room and then I saw her. Tiffany's mother, Linda, was standing by the fireplace, looking a bit lost. She was a nice enough woman, always a little scattered, a little flighty. She'd put her own empty glass down on the mantelpiece and seemed to have forgotten about it. An idea, cold and terrible and perfect, crystallized in my mind. I waited for the perfect moment. It came when one of our neighbors grabbed Tiffany's arm to gush over her new diamond bracelet. All eyes were on her. I took a slow step back, moving casually towards the fireplace as if to admire a painting. No one was watching me. In one smooth, silent motion, I placed my poisoned glass on the mantelpiece right next to Linda's purse, and picked up her empty one. Then I turned to Linda. "Linda," I said softly, "you look like you could use a drink." "Oh," she said, looking startled. "I think I put mine down somewhere." Her eyes landed on the full glass I just placed on the mantel. Without a second thought, she reached out and took it. "Oh, there it is. Thank you, Carol." She took a sip. Then another. "My," she said, frowning slightly. "This champagne tastes interesting." Before I could answer, Kevin was at the front of the room, tapping a spoon against his glass. "Everyone, can I have your attention, please? I'd like to propose a toast to my amazing mother." Everyone raised their glasses. I raised my now empty one. Linda, smiling, raised hers and drained the last of the liquid. And then it happened. The toast was barely over when a strange, strangled sound came from Linda. Her eyes went wide. She grabbed at her throat, her face turning a ghastly shade of pale. The champagne flute slipped from her fingers and shattered on the marble floor. She took a staggering step forward. Then her body began to convulse violently. Foam, white and thick, started to collect at the corners of her mouth as she collapsed. The room erupted in screams. Tiffany shrieked, a sound of what anyone else would call pure horror, and rushed to her mother's side. "Someone call 911," she screamed, her voice cracking. It was an Oscar-worthy performance. But as paramedics swarmed in and my living room turned into a scene of controlled chaos, I wasn't looking at Tiffany. I looked over at my son, my Kevin, expecting to see sheer terror for his mother-in-law. But that's not what I saw. It was a flicker, so fast I might have missed it if I hadn't been a mother for 40 years, trained to read his every expression. It wasn't just fear. It was disappointment. His eyes met Tiffany's for a split second, and in that moment I knew. This wasn't just her plan. I insisted on going to the hospital, a demand that seemed to momentarily short-circuit Kevin's carefully constructed facade of the concerned son. "Mom, you're in shock," he said, his hand hovering near my elbow, not quite touching me. "You should stay here, rest. Tiffany and I will handle everything." Handle everything. The words echoed in the sudden quiet of the room, no longer sounding helpful but sinister. They had already handled the champagne. I looked him dead in the eye, and for the first time in years, I let the full unyielding force of the woman who built a company from scratch show through. "She is a guest in my home, Kevin. I am going." My tone was flat, leaving no room for argument. He flinched just slightly and stepped aside. The ambulance ride was a surreal 20-minute masterclass in deceit. Tiffany sat on the jump seat, her face buried in her hands, producing loud, gasping sobs that were utterly devoid of tears. It was a performance, and a bad one at that. Every few moments she would peek through her fingers at me, her eyes sharp and assessing, before remembering her role and collapsing into another round of noisy grief. Kevin sat beside her, a statue of tense anxiety, his thumbs a blur across his phone screen. He was sending a relentless stream of messages, his face illuminated by the pale blue light. He wasn't comforting his supposedly distraught wife. He was coordinating, reporting, or perhaps panicking. I watched them, my own grief real, but for a completely different reason. The family I thought I had was a fiction. At Scottsdale General, the air was cold and smelled of bleach and fear. The waiting room was an island of uncomfortable plastic chairs under the harsh glare of fluorescent lights. They wheeled Linda through a set of double doors, and we were left to wait. I deliberately chose a chair with a clear line of sight to the main triage desk. I pretended to be absorbed in a worn-out copy of a magazine, but my ears were straining, filtering out the background noise of coughs and quiet conversations, focusing on the clipped, professional jargon of the nurses and doctors. I heard scattered words that made my blood run even colder. "BP is bottoming out. Arrhythmia. Possible ingestion." Then I hit the jackpot of terror. A young, tired-looking doctor was speaking in a low voice to an older nurse, reviewing a chart on a computer screen. I had to lean forward slightly to catch it. "Initial tox screen is back from the lab," the doctor murmured, his brow furrowed. "It's oleander extract. A significant concentration. This was no accident, Mary. Call the police liaison. We have a legal duty to report." Oleander. The word detonated silently in my mind. Not a vague something bad. A specific lethal poison. The pretty pink and white flowers that lined every highway and suburban garden in Arizona. A plant so toxic that a single leaf could kill a grown man. It was a poison that caused catastrophic heart failure, symptoms that could easily be mistaken for a massive coronary event, especially in a woman Linda's age. Or more to the point, a woman my age. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. They hadn't just been reckless. They had been meticulous. They had chosen a weapon that was both deadly and deniable. Tiffany was pacing back and forth, her expensive heels clicking a frantic, sharp rhythm on the linoleum floor, a metronome counting down her anxiety. Kevin had gone to find a vending machine, a transparent excuse to make a phone call in private. This was my chance. I stood up and walked over to her, placing a gentle hand on her arm. She jumped as if she'd been electrocuted. "It's so strange, isn't it?" I said, my voice a soft murmur of shared concern. I had to force the words past the lump of ice in my throat. Your mother never really cared for champagne. Do you think there could have been something wrong with that particular bottle? Her face, which had been pale with feigned worry, turned a chalky, ghastly white. Her eyes darted around the waiting room, looking for an escape route. What are you talking about? She snapped, her voice cracking, rising an octave too high. That's a ridiculous thing to say. The doctor said it was probably a bad reaction to her blood pressure medication. She's always been careless with her pills. She violently pulled her arm away from me, her manicured hands trembling uncontrollably. I didn't press her. I didn't have to. I just held her gaze, my expression calm and questioning. Her panic was a signed confession. I watched as she fumbled for her phone, her eyes wild, and hurried down the hallway, muttering about needing to find Kevin. You might be thinking that this was the worst of it, discovering with absolute certainty that your own family had tried to murder you for your inheritance. But believe me, this was just the beginning. The poison was simply their opening move in a game I was just starting to understand. I didn't know it then, but their plan B was already in motion. A far more insidious plot designed not just to end my life, but to steal my identity, my sanity, and my very soul. As I drove home alone in the dark, the familiar streets of my neighborhood felt alien and menacing. I wasn't just in a family crisis. I was in a war zone, and the enemy was sleeping in my son's bed. I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that I had to fight back, or I would not survive. The drive home from the hospital was through a city I no longer recognized. Every familiar landmark seemed coated in a layer of menace. When I finally pulled into my garage, the silence of my own home was deafening. I walked through the rooms, the remnants of the party, a few stray napkins, the faint scent of champagne, serving as a ghostly reminder of the afternoon's horror. My mind was a whirlwind, replaying not just the party, but the weeks, the months leading up to it. And as I did, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. The poisoning wasn't a sudden, impulsive act. It was the brutal culmination of a long, patient, and utterly cruel psychological campaign. They had been gaslighting me for the better part of a year. It was death by 1,000 tiny cuts, each one designed to make me doubt my own mind. 3 months ago, I was certain I had a lunch appointment with my friend Margaret. I had it written in my calendar. But when I called her to confirm, she sounded confused. No, Carol, we never made that plan. Later that day, Tiffany had called, her voice dripping with syrupy concern. Kevin told me you got your dates mixed up again. Mom, are you sure you're getting enough sleep? At the time, I dismissed it as my own error. Now I saw it for what it was. A planted seed of doubt. Then there were the lost items. My car keys, which for 20 years have lived in a ceramic bowl by the front door, vanished. We searched the house for an hour, with Kevin and Tiffany sighing dramatically about how forgetful I was becoming. The next day, Tiffany found them for me. In the freezer, tucked behind a bag of frozen peas. Oh, you silly thing, she chirped, patting my arm. We have to be more careful, don't we? I remembered the hot flush of shame I'd felt, the genuine worry that I was starting to lose my grip. I now realized that shame was their weapon of choice. They isolated me subtly at first. They'd tell me friends had called when they hadn't, or forget to pass on messages. They were building a wall around me, brick by brick, creating a world in which their voices were the only ones I could trust, and their narrative of my decline was the only one that seemed true. The morning after Linda's collapse, the next phase of their plan began. Kevin arrived at my door, holding a box of fresh croissants, his face a perfect mask of filial devotion. I couldn't sleep all night, he said, his voice low and serious as he stepped into my kitchen. Mom, after what happened with Linda, it was a wake-up call. Tiffany and I are so worried about you. Living all alone in this big house. It's just not safe. He placed the pastries on the kitchen island, his movements slow and deliberate, and then he produced it. A glossy tri-fold brochure. The front showed a smiling silver-haired couple playing tennis, with the words "The Golden Vista." A new beginning in elegant script. He opened it up on the counter, the pictures inside showcasing a life of curated luxurious ease. A golf course, a spa, a library with a fireplace. It looked like a permanent cruise ship on land. We did some research, Kevin said, his voice a soft, persuasive murmur. It's the best facility in the state. They have doctors and nurses on site 24/7. Gourmet meals prepared by a chef, social activities. You would be safe, Mom. You'd be cared for. He spoke as if safety and care were things I was incapable of providing for myself. He flipped to the back page, to the section on fees, and tapped a manicured finger on a number that made my breath catch. There's usually a long waiting list, but a premium suite just opened up unexpectedly. It's a corner unit with a view of the mountains. The only thing is, they require the full entrance fee up front to secure it. He paused for dramatic effect. It's $500,000. He said the number as if it were pocket change. But, he added quickly, seeing the look on my face, it's an investment in your well-being. It covers all your care, for the rest of your life. And with the money from the company sale, it's really not a problem, is it? And there it was. The entire monstrous plan, laid out on a glossy brochure between a picture of a water aerobics class and a sample dinner menu. Poison me. If I survive, convince me I'm a danger to myself. Frighten me with a near-death experience in my own home. Then present the solution. A gilded cage where I'd sign away $500,000 just to get in the door. And once inside, I had no doubt they'd pressure me to sign over power of attorney, giving them complete control. They would have my money, my freedom, my life. They would visit me on Sundays, bringing flowers and condolences for the mother they were slowly erasing. The cold, calculated cruelty of it was breathtaking. I felt a surge of white-hot fury, a rage so pure it burned away all the fear and confusion. They thought I was a fragile old woman. They were about to find out how wrong they were. I forced a weak, wavering smile. It looks very peaceful, dear, I said, my voice soft. It's a very big decision. You must let me think about it. The relief that washed over his face was sickening. He thought I was taking the bait. He had no idea I was about to set a trap of my own. The second Kevin's luxury sedan pulled out of my driveway, I grabbed my purse and my car keys. There was no more time for thinking, for doubting. It was time for action. My first and only call was to Mark, my lawyer. His calm, measured voice on the phone was the first sane thing I'd heard in what felt like an eternity. Carol, he said, after I gave him the bare-bones summary, don't say another word on the phone. Get to my office. Now. Sitting in the familiar leather chair across from his polished mahogany desk, I laid out everything. I started with the gaslighting, the keys in the freezer, the phantom appointments, and moved to the party, the mirror, the vial, the switched glasses. I told him about the doctor's words in the oleander, and I finished by sliding the glossy golden vista brochure across his desk. He listened without interruption, his face growing progressively grimmer. When I was done, he picked up the brochure and held it between two fingers as if it were contaminated. This isn't just about inheritance, Carol, he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. This is a predatory, multi-pronged attack. They want to strip you of your assets, your autonomy, and your credibility. They're trying to legally erase you before you're even gone. He looked me straight in the eye. So we fight back. Not defensively. We go on the attack. That afternoon, my war council began. Mark's first move was a strategic masterstroke against their gaslighting campaign. They want to paint you as incompetent? We'll get an evaluation that proves you're sharper than both of them combined. He scheduled an appointment for me the very next day with Dr. Lena Hansen, the most respected geriatric psychiatrist in Phoenix, a woman whose expert testimony was considered unshakable in court. I spent 3 grueling but validating hours with her, undergoing a battery of tests that stretched my memory, my logic, my reasoning. The result was a 10-page, notarized, ironclad report that concluded I possessed cognitive functions and executive reasoning skills in the 98th percentile for my age group. It was more than a shield, it was a weapon. Next, we addressed my physical safety. This house is your home, but right now it's also the scene of the crime, Mark said. He gave me the number of a security firm that handled contracts for corporations and foreign diplomats. They were discreet and they were the best. The next morning, a team of 3 technicians in an unmarked van arrived. For a full day they worked installing a system that was both invisible and impenetrable. Tiny high-definition cameras were hidden in smoke detectors and light fixtures. Motion sensors were calibrated to distinguish between a pet and a person. A silent panic button was installed by my bed and in the kitchen, a direct line to the Scottsdale PD that bypassed the 911 system. I watched as they transformed my sanctuary into a fortress. It was a violation in a way, but it was also a profound relief. I could finally breathe again in my own home. But the real work, the move that would checkmate their entire game, was the complete and total restructuring of my estate. We locked ourselves in Mark's office and dismantled the life's work they were so eager to claim. The old will, which left everything to Kevin as my sole heir, was shredded. In its place, we drafted a new set of documents, a complex web of trusts and legal entities that would be a nightmare for any probate lawyer to challenge. The new will was a masterpiece of legal precision. I stipulated that a new trust be created in Kevin's name. Into this trust, I would deposit enough money to generate a modest annual annuity, $50,000 a year for life. Enough to keep a roof over his head, but not nearly enough to fund Tiffany's extravagant tastes. It was a lifeline, not a lottery ticket. Then came the clause Mark called the blade. The trust would be immediately dissolved and its contents forfeited if Kevin were ever convicted of a felony, particularly one committed against me. And Tiffany? I had Mark draft a single brutal sentence. For reasons known to me, and with the full benefit of legal counsel, I intentionally make no provision in this will or any subsequent codicil for my daughter-in-law, Tiffany Miller, nor for her heirs or assigns. Not a penny. Not a photograph. Nothing. The lion's share, over 95% of my entire net worth, was directed into a newly formed charitable entity, the Robert Miller Foundation for Alzheimer's Research, a tribute to the husband I adored and the disease that had stolen his mother from us. My legacy wouldn't be squandered on designer bags and sports cars. It would fight a disease. It would have meaning. 2 days later they returned, unable to wait any longer. They sat on my sofa, directly in the line of sight of a new camera. "So, Mom," Kevin began, his voice smooth as oil, "have you had a chance to think about our suggestion?" I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment, watching the greed flicker in their eyes. "I have," I said finally, my voice calm and even. "You know, an event like what happened to Linda. It really forces a person to confront their own mortality, to think about their priorities." I looked from Kevin's expectant face to Tiffany's. "That's why I spent all day yesterday with my lawyer, completely rewriting my will." The effect was instantaneous. It wasn't a gasp, but a sudden sharp intake of air from both of them. Their smiles froze, cracking at the edges. The polite masks of concern slipped, revealing a flash of raw, ugly panic. They had thought they were closing in for the kill. They had no idea I had just rewritten the rules of the entire game. But what I didn't know then was that they were about to flip the board over and resort to something far more desperate and far more dangerous. A week passed in a state of tense, unnatural quiet. The daily concerned phone calls from Kevin ceased. Tiffany's syrupy text messages stopped. It was the eerie calm before a storm, and every instinct I had honed over a lifetime of reading people in high-stakes negotiations was screaming at me that they were regrouping, planning a new line of attack. They wouldn't just walk away from $25 million because I'd updated my will. In their minds, that money was already theirs. I was just the inconvenient obstacle they had to remove. I couldn't just wait for their next move. I had to see it coming. That's when I made the call to Brenda. Brenda was a private investigator, a former police detective who had started her own firm. She was sharp, tenacious, and utterly discreet. My company had used her for years to vet potential business partners and uncover corporate espionage. She was the best. "Brenda, it's Carol Miller," I said when she answered. "I have a personal matter. A sensitive one." I didn't have to say more. "My office, 1 hour," she replied and hung up. In her Spartan, uncluttered office, I laid out the whole ugly story. She listened, her expression unreadable, taking sparse notes in a small leather-bound book. When I finished, she didn't offer sympathy. She offered a plan. "They feel the timeline accelerating," she said, her voice a low growl. Changing the will was a power move. It made them desperate. Desperate people make mistakes. I'll put a team on them. Full surveillance. We'll track their movements, their financials, their communications. If they so much as breathe in a way that's out of line, I'll know about it. While Brenda's team went to work, I had to play my part in the charade. I needed them to think their plan was still viable, that I was still the confused, pliable old woman they believed me to be. I waited 2 days, then called Kevin. I pitched my voice to sound frail, uncertain. "Kevin, dear? I've been thinking. And you're right. I said, a little quaver in my voice. This house is just too much for me. I've been looking over that brochure for the Golden Vista again. I could almost feel his posture straightening on the other end of the line. His greed reignited. But all this paperwork. It's so overwhelming for me. I was hoping you and Tiffany could come over on Friday to help me sort through it. Especially that power of attorney form. I simply can't make sense of it on my own. Of course, Mom, he said, his voice dripping with false concern. We'll be there. Whatever you need. He thought he was reeling me back in. He had no idea he was the one being played. Did you think this was just about a shady nursing home contract and some inheritance fraud? Stick around, because what Brenda discovered next turned this from a story of greed into something out of a crime thriller. 2 days later, on Thursday afternoon, my private phone line rang. It was Brenda. Her voice was stripped of all professional calm. It was tight, urgent. Carol, are you sitting down? You need to sit down. I sank into my armchair, my heart starting to pound. I've been on your son. He's in deeper financial trouble than we even knew. He's been liquidating his business assets at a loss. But that's not why I'm calling. She paused, and I heard the click of a computer mouse. He met with someone yesterday and again this morning. A man named Stan Kowalski, a disgruntled former employee from Kevin's architecture firm. Stan claims Kevin owes him over $20,000 in back pay and bonuses. What about him? I asked, my mouth dry. My operative managed to place a micro-recorder in Stan's car after their first meeting, Brenda said, her voice grim. They met at a diner off the 101 this morning to finalize the deal. I have the recording. I'm going to play it for you. My hand trembled as I held the phone to my ear. The audio was slightly muffled, the clatter of plates and diner chatter in the background, but Kevin's voice came through with horrifying clarity. It was a voice I didn't recognize, stripped of all warmth, cold and flat as a tombstone. It has to look like an accident, I heard my son say. She's predictable. She goes to the Bosch's supermarket on Scottsdale Road every Friday morning. The parking lot is a zoo. No one will look twice. Just needs to be a little push. An old woman trips over a curb, she falls. It happens every day. But I need it to be a bad fall, Stan. Do you understand me? I'm talking a broken hip. Something that lands her in the hospital for a long recovery. Something that makes it medically impossible for her to live alone anymore. She'll be scared, in pain, pumped full of morphine. She'll sign anything we put in front of her. The power of attorney, the admission forms, everything. Then a gruff, unfamiliar voice answered. Stan. A broken hip on a 70-year-old woman? That's not a little push, Kevin. That can kill someone. This is gonna cost you more than 20 grand. You'll get your 20 grand plus another 20 when it's done, Kevin replied. His voice impatient, chillingly practical. Just get it done. Tomorrow morning. And make it look convincing. The recording ended. The silence that followed was a physical presence in the room. I sat there, frozen in my chair, the phone feeling like a block of ice against my ear. A broken hip. My son, my own flesh and blood, was hiring a thug to physically assault me, to break my bones, to cripple me. The poison had been Tiffany's cowardly plot. This was different. This was brutal, direct, and somehow so much more personal. It was an act of intimate violence, planned by the boy whose scraped knees I had once bandaged. They weren't just trying to steal from me anymore. They were willing to shatter my body to get what they wanted. A cold, hard resolve, harder than steel, settled deep in my soul. They had left me no choice. This was no longer a family dispute. This was a war for my survival. My first call was not to Mark. My first call was directly to the Scottsdale Police Department. I asked for Detective Morrison. When I had her on the line, my voice was steady, devoid of the tremor I felt in my hands. Detective, I said. I have new information regarding the attempt on my life. Information you need to hear right now. An hour later, I was sitting in a sterile interview room, Brenda beside me, as Detective Morrison and another detective listened to the recording from Stan's car. I watched their faces as my son's voice filled the small room. His cold, methodical instructions on how to injure his own mother. Morrison's expression hardened from professional curiosity to cold fury. An assault on a senior citizen, especially one this premeditated, is a top priority felony, she said, snapping the tape player shut. He wants to stage an accident? Fine. We'll be his audience. The plan they formulated was simple, risky, and absolutely necessary. They wouldn't prevent the crime. They would let it begin, capturing the final irrefutable piece of evidence they needed to connect Kevin directly to the act. I was to be the bait. Friday morning arrived with a sky the color of a pale, washed-out sapphire. I got dressed with a deliberate slowness. My hands were surprisingly steady as I fastened the buttons on my favorite silk blouse. Beneath it, taped securely to my skin by a female officer just moments before, was a small high-fidelity microphone and a silent GPS tracker. My heart wasn't racing with fear. It was beating with a slow, heavy rhythm of grim purpose. I drove my Lexus to the Bosch's, the same supermarket I had been frequenting for 3 decades. It felt surreal turning this mundane weekly errand into a stage for a police sting operation. I knew that somewhere in the sea of SUVs and sedans, at least 4 undercover officers were in position, watching, waiting. I walked through the automatic doors into the cool, air-conditioned world of the grocery store. The familiar sights and sounds, the rattle of shopping carts, the soft music playing over the intercom, the smell of rotisserie chickens, were a bizarre backdrop to the drama about to unfold. I moved through the aisles on autopilot, my mind a million miles away. I picked up items I didn't need. A carton of milk, a loaf of bread, a bunch of bananas, my hands moving mechanically. Every man who passed me in the aisle made my breath catch. Was that him? Or him? I felt like a soldier walking through a minefield. After 15 minutes that felt like an eternity, I paid for my groceries and pushed the cart out into the bright, unforgiving glare of the Arizona sun. The parking lot was bustling, a chaotic dance of cars and pedestrians, just as Kevin had predicted. I started the long walk toward my car, parked deliberately in a more isolated section of the lot. My steps were even, my posture relaxed. I could feel the eyes on me. Then I saw him. He was leaning against a rusty pickup truck, pretending to look at his phone, burly with a faded t-shirt and jeans. Stan. He pushed himself off the truck and began walking towards me. His path a direct intercept course with mine. This was it. My body went on high alert. I tightened my grip on the handle of the shopping cart, my knuckles turning white. The cart was my only shield. He was 20 feet away. 10. 5. He looked directly at me, a flicker of something, maybe hesitation, maybe just cold assessment in his eyes. He opened his mouth, his voice a low grunt. "Mrs. Miller," he said. "Kevin says hello." He took a final, decisive step and lunged, his big hands reaching out, not for my purse but for my shoulders, aiming to shove me backwards over the concrete curb behind me. He never made contact. In the split second that his hands entered the space around me, the parking lot erupted. It was a perfectly choreographed explosion of action. The beat-up sedan parked 2 spaces down screeched to a halt beside us, its doors flying open. A soccer mom minivan that had been slowly cruising down the aisle slammed on its brakes, and 2 men jumped out. Suddenly, Stan was surrounded, 4 handguns pointed directly at his chest. "Scottsdale PD. Get on the ground. On the ground now." Detective Morrison's voice was a whip crack, cutting through the ordinary noise of the parking lot. Shoppers froze, staring in disbelief. Stan's face was a comical mask of shock and terror. He threw his hands in the air and collapsed onto the hot asphalt without a word. It was over in less than 10 seconds. I stood there, my heart finally hammering in my chest, the bananas sitting innocently in my cart. At the station, facing a long list of felony charges, Stan crumbled. He sang like a canary, giving them a detailed signed confession that laid out the entire conspiracy, from the initial meeting to the promised payment. They had Kevin cold. I drove home, the adrenaline finally leaving my system, replaced by an icy, focused calm. There was one final act to this tragedy. I walked into my house, sat down in my favorite armchair, and picked up the phone. I dialed Kevin's number, carefully schooling my voice to sound shaky, old, and defeated. "Kevin, darling?" I said, letting a little quaver into my voice. I've made my decision. You were right all along. I can't be alone anymore. Please, can you and Tiffany bring the papers over? I'm ready to sign." He had no idea his hired thug was sitting in a police interrogation room. He thought his brutal plan had worked, that he had finally broken me. He had no idea he was about to walk, willingly and eagerly, into the real trap. They arrived in under an hour, a testament to their eagerness. They walked into my home not like a son and daughter-in-law, but like victors claiming their prize. Their faces were alight with a triumphant, predatory glow that they made little effort to conceal behind thin masks of sympathy. Tiffany carried a sleek leather briefcase, which she placed on my polished dining room table and opened with a decisive, satisfying click. It felt like a scene from a movie, the villains revealing their stolen treasure. "We're so glad you've come to the right decision, Mom," Kevin said, placing a hand on my shoulder. His touch was meant to be comforting, but it felt heavy, possessive. The same hand that had, just hours before, paid another man to break my bones. I had to use every ounce of my willpower not to recoil. "You're doing the right thing," he continued, his voice smooth as silk. "This is for your own safety." They laid the documents out like a feast. The thick, multi-page admission contract for the Golden Vista, the dizzying financial disclosure forms, and on top of it all, like the centerpiece, the power of attorney document. It was the fake one Mark had so brilliantly prepared, a perfect replica down to the watermarked paper, but legally it was worthless. To them it was the keys to my kingdom. "This is the most important one, Carol," Tiffany cooed, her long red fingernail tapping the signature line. "It's just a standard procedure. It gives Kevin the authority to manage your complex financial affairs for you, so you don't have to worry about a thing." My complex financial affairs. As if I hadn't built a $25 million company from nothing. I picked up the document, pretending to squint at the dense legal text. "Oh, my eyes aren't what they used to be," I sighed, playing the role they had written for me to perfection. I let my hand tremble just a little. "It seems like I'm signing away so much control, Kevin. Are you absolutely sure this is what's best?" He crouched down beside my chair, his face a mask of earnest sincerity. It was a truly masterful performance. "It's just a formality, Mom, to protect you," he said, his voice a low, reassuring murmur. "We're here to take care of you. You've worked so hard your whole life. It's time to let us carry the burden. You won't have to worry about a single thing, ever again." The finality in his voice was chilling. He meant it. Once I signed, my life as an independent person would be over. I took the expensive fountain pen he offered me. The weight of it felt obscene in my hand. They watched me, their bodies leaning forward in unison, their eyes fixed on the pen's nib. They were like wolves, patient and starving, watching their prey finally succumb. I took a deep, shaky breath and then slowly, deliberately, I signed my name on the line. Carol Miller. The scratch of the pen on the thick paper was the only sound in the room. I signed the next document and the next. With each signature, I could literally see the tension drain out of their shoulders, replaced by a giddy, almost euphoric relief. Tiffany shot a quick, triumphant glance at Kevin. They had done it. They had won. I pushed the final document back across the table. "There," I said, my voice barely a whisper, as if the act had taken all my strength. "It's done." "Wonderful, Mom. Just wonderful," Tiffany chirped, her movements suddenly brisk and efficient as she began gathering the papers, stacking them into a neat, valuable pile. "We'll get these filed with your bank and the investment firm first thing on Monday morning." "Good," I said, taking a slow sip of the water I had placed nearby. "I'm glad that's all settled." I set the glass down with a soft click. "Now there's just one last piece of business." They both looked at me, their victorious smiles frozen in place. They were probably expecting a tearful, sentimental speech, a final handing over of the torch. They were not expecting what happened next. Right on cue, as if summoned by a stage director, the doorbell rang. A sharp, clear chime that cut through the quiet room like a gunshot. A flicker of confusion crossed Kevin's face. "Are you expecting someone, Mom?" I allowed myself a small, serene smile. The first genuine one I'd had in days. "Oh, that must be my lawyer, Mark." I asked him to stop by to notarize the signatures and make sure everything is legally binding. You know, to dot the I's and cross the T's. Kevin's face relaxed into a smug grin. "Of course. How efficient of you, Mom." He walked to the front door, the picture of a man who had the world on a string. He pulled it open, a welcoming smile already forming on his lips. But the smile disintegrated, replaced by a look of utter, slack-jawed, stupefied shock. Standing on my porch, silhouetted against the afternoon sun, was not my lawyer. It was Detective Morrison, and she was not alone. Kevin Miller? Detective Morrison's voice was devoid of any warmth, a flat, official tone that sliced through the cozy domestic scene. She didn't wait for him to respond. She and a uniformed officer stepped past my stunned son, their presence instantly changing the atmosphere in the room from one of quiet triumph to one of cold, impending dread. Tiffany, who was placing the stack of signed documents neatly into her briefcase, looked up, her expression shifting from satisfaction to sharp annoyance. "Excuse me? Can we help you? This is a private residence." "I'm Detective Morrison, Scottsdale PD," she said, her gaze sweeping the room before landing on Tiffany with unnerving intensity. "And you must be Tiffany Miller. We're here because we have some follow-up questions regarding the sudden illness of a Mrs. Linda Peterson at a party hosted in this home last week." Tiffany let out a short, incredulous laugh, a sound that was sharp and brittle. "You have got to be kidding me," she said, snapping her briefcase shut. "I already told the hospital everything. That was a private medical issue. My mother had a severe reaction to her blood pressure medication. The doctors confirmed it. That's not what the hospital's final conclusive toxicology report says," Detective Morrison countered, her voice dangerously calm. She pulled a small notebook from her jacket pocket, flipping it open. "It says Mrs. Peterson ingested a near-lethal quantity of oleander extract, a potent cardiotoxin with no medical use whatsoever. We also had the remaining champagne from the party sent to the state crime lab. The bottle was laced with the exact same poison." The detective's gaze was like a physical weight, pressing down on Tiffany, pinning her in place. Someone at this party deliberately and maliciously poisoned that champagne. The color drained from Tiffany's face, leaving it a waxy mottled gray. Kevin, still frozen by the doorway, stared at his wife, the gears of comprehension slowly, horribly grinding in his mind. "Jess," he whispered, his voice cracking. "What is she talking about? What is oleander?" "I didn't do anything," Tiffany shrieked, her carefully constructed composure shattering into 1,000 pieces. Her voice was high and shrill with raw panic. "This is insane. This is a setup. Why in God's name would I poison my own mother?" "That's a very good question," Detective Morrison said, her voice dropping to an icy calm. She pulled another document from the folder under her arm. This one had the distinct look of a commercial policy. Maybe it had something to do with this. "A $500,000 life insurance policy you took out on your mother-in-law, Carol Miller, 6 months ago. A policy that, interestingly, lists you as the sole beneficiary." She let the document fall onto the dining room table. It landed with a soft, damning slap. "That gives you a very clear, very powerful financial motive for murder, Mrs. Miller. This is a mistake. A lie." Tiffany spun towards me, her eyes wild and desperate. "Carol, tell them. Tell them this is all some crazy misunderstanding." I stood up from my chair, feeling a strength I hadn't felt in years. I looked at this woman, this monster who had smiled at me while planning my death, and I felt nothing but a vast, cold emptiness. "There's no misunderstanding, Tiffany," I said, my voice quiet but ringing with clarity in the silent room. "I saw you. I was watching you in the mirror. I saw you put the contents of that little vial into my champagne glass. I took a step closer. So I switched it with your mother's." Kevin made a choked sound, a strangled gasp. His head whipped around to face me, his eyes wide with horror and disbelief. "You knew," he whispered, the words barely audible. "You knew she was trying to poison you?" I finally let my gaze settle on my son, the object of my greatest love and my deepest betrayal. "Oh, I know everything, Kevin," I said, my voice hardening with every word. "I know about the poison. I know about the life insurance policy. I know about your drowning debts and the checks you've been bouncing all over town." I walked over to the dining table and stood before them, the hunter who had finally cornered her prey. "I even know about your disgusting little plan to hire a man named Stan Kowalski to assault me in a supermarket parking lot this morning and break my hip." It was as if I had physically struck him. Kevin staggered back a step, his face a canvas of pure, guilty terror. He looked like he was going to vomit. "We have Mr. Kowalski in custody," Detective Morrison added grimly, stepping forward. He was arrested at the scene an hour ago. He was very cooperative. He gave us a full signed confession detailing your entire arrangement. It was over. The intricate web of lies, manipulation, and violence they had woven over months came crashing down around them in that one terrible moment. The truth was out, and it was ugly and undeniable. Tiffany finally broke. She launched into a screaming, incoherent tirade, a torrent of curses and denials aimed at me, at the police, at her now useless husband. Kevin just sagged against the wall, his face buried in his hands, making small, wretched, choking sounds. Detective Morrison gave a sharp nod to the uniformed officer. Tiffany Miller, you are under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and insurance fraud. Kevin Miller, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit aggravated assault and conspiracy to commit murder. As the officer snapped the cold steel handcuffs on Tiffany's wrists, her rage focused back on me. Her face was a twisted mask of hate. She lunged towards the table, her body straining against the officer's grip, her fingers clawing at the stack of signed documents. It doesn't matter, you old witch, she spat, her voice raw. We've got control now. I've got the papers. It's all legal. I watched her, a pathetic, cornered animal, and for the first time, I allowed myself a small, cold, and deeply satisfying smile. Oh, and that power of attorney you're holding so tightly? I said, my voice clear and calm. Feel free to use it. After the police cruisers pulled away, taking my son and daughter-in-law with them, the house fell into a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight. The air was thick with the aftershock of the confrontation, the phantom echoes of Tiffany's screams and Kevin's sobs. The beautifully arranged documents they had brought with such triumph now lay scattered on my dining room table like casualties of a battle. Mark, my lawyer, who had been waiting discreetly in his car down the street, came inside. He surveyed the scene, his expression a mixture of grim satisfaction and concern. He looked at me, his eyes gentle. Are you okay, Carol? I took a deep breath, the first one that didn't feel tight and constricted in weeks. I will be, I said, and I was surprised to find that I meant it. The storm had finally passed. Kevin hadn't been taken in the same car as Tiffany. They were separated immediately. He was still here, slumped in an armchair in my living room, a uniformed officer standing quietly by the door, waiting for a separate transport vehicle. He was a ghost of the confident man who had walked in an hour earlier, his expensive suit now looking rumpled and absurd. He looked small, broken, and utterly defeated. I walked over to the coffee table and picked up the fake power of attorney document, the one Tiffany had clutched with such desperate hope. I held it out to him. I believe this belongs to you, I said. He flinched as if I were holding a hot iron, shaking his head, refusing to look at it. I don't understand, he mumbled, his voice hoarse from crying. What did you mean? Feel free to use it. His question was a plea, a desperate search for some loophole, some way out of the abyss he now found himself in. I sat down in the chair opposite him, creating a space between us that felt as wide as the Grand Canyon. That document you and Tiffany were so eager for me to sign. I began, my voice clear and methodical, stripped of all motherly warmth, gives you complete and total power of attorney over a specific bank account. I had Mark set it up yesterday afternoon at a new bank. You are legally empowered to access it, manage its contents, and withdraw every last cent. I let that sink in for a moment, watching a tiny, pathetic flicker of hope dawn in his eyes. Then I extinguished it. There is exactly $1 in that account, Kevin. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing silently. He looked like a fish gasping for air. What? He finally croaked. Mark stepped forward, his voice a firm, legal anchor in the emotional storm. Your mother's real assets, Kevin. The proceeds from the sale of the company, her investment portfolios, her property deeds, were transferred 2 days ago into a series of irrevocable trusts. The legal structure is airtight. The only person with signatory authority is your mother. They are untouchable. By you, by Tiffany, by the army of creditors who are about to descend on you. I continued, my own voice as cold and hard as the steel of the handcuffs that had just closed around his wife's wrists. And the will. The will you were so worried about that you were willing to poison and cripple me for it. I leaned forward slightly. The new will stipulates that a trust be created in your name upon my death. It would have paid you a small but steady monthly stipend for the rest of your life. A safety net. The last act of a mother who, despite everything, didn't want to see her only child destitute. I saw his shoulders relax just a fraction. He thought he still had something left. I took that away from him too. However, Mark included a very standard interim clause. It's also known as a no contest or, more appropriately in your case, a bad son clause. It stipulates that if a beneficiary is found guilty of a felony, particularly a crime committed against the testator, that's me, they are automatically and irrevocably disinherited. Your conviction for conspiracy, which is a certainty, will trigger that clause. You get nothing, Kevin. Not now. Not ever. The finality of it hit him. This was the true consequence. Not just jail time, but the complete and total erasure from the life of comfort and privilege he had taken for granted. He finally broke, collapsing forward, his face in his hands, his body shaking with deep, racking sobs. "Mom, I'm so sorry," he wept. "I swear. I never wanted this. I was just trying to fix things. We were in so much debt. I didn't know what to do." The excuses, the pathetic justifications, they just washed over me. I felt nothing. The part of me that would have rushed to comfort him, to soothe his pain, had died. It had died somewhere between the glint of the vial in the mirror and the cold, calculated words on Brenda's recording. "Fix things." I repeated, my voice flat. "Is that what you call it? Your sorry is about a decade too late and $25 million short, Kevin. It's the word you use when you get caught." I stood up, the conversation over. "You made your choices. You chose a life you couldn't afford over a mother who loved you. You chose Tiffany's poison over my trust. Now you will live with those choices, and their consequences for the rest of your life." As the officer gently led my son, my only child, out of my home, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt empty. The battle was won, but the cost was immeasurable. I had saved my life, but I had lost my son forever. The 6 months that followed were a blur of legal proceedings, therapy sessions, and the slow, arduous process of rebuilding a life from the wreckage. The trial was a media sensation in Scottsdale, the salacious story of a beautiful, greedy daughter-in-law and her weak-willed husband trying to murder their wealthy matriarch. The evidence was overwhelming. Stan's confession, Brenda's damning recordings, the hospital's toxicology reports, the insurance policy. It was an open and shut case. Tiffany, arrogant and defiant to the very end, never showed an ounce of remorse. She was sentenced to 20 years in the Arizona State Prison Complex. Kevin, who finally seemed to grasp the enormity of his actions, accepted a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to conspiracy and testified against his wife. He was sentenced to 5 years. Their beautiful, over-leveraged house was repossessed by the bank, their luxury cars were towed away, and their names became a local cautionary tale. My life, in contrast, began to find a new, quieter rhythm. Linda, Tiffany's mother, became an unexpected pillar of support. After the initial shock and shame, she disowned her daughter completely. We found ourselves drawn together. 2 women of a certain age, bonded by the shared, surreal trauma of being betrayed by our own flesh and blood. We met for coffee every Tuesday morning, talking for hours not just about the trial, but about life, about our pasts, about how to navigate a future we never anticipated. We found a strange, powerful friendship in the ruins of our families. But the true light, the undeniable grace that emerged from all this darkness, was my granddaughter, Chloe. At 16, she was wise beyond her years, with a deep well of empathy that her parents so profoundly lacked. With them incarcerated, her future was uncertain. I didn't hesitate. I petitioned the court for custody, and she came to live with me. She moved into the guest room, and my large, silent house was once again filled with the sounds of life. The pop music she played while doing her homework, the laughter of her friends on weekends, the late-night conversations we'd have in the kitchen over a bowl of ice cream. She was horrified by what her parents had done, and she carried a heavy burden of misplaced guilt. "Grandma," she would often say, her eyes filled with a sadness that broke my heart. "I'm so sorry for what they did to you." I would hold her close and whisper, "It was never your fault, my love. Never. You are not their mistakes. You are my future." And I found a new purpose, a new reason to get up in the morning. I officially launched the Robert Miller Foundation for Alzheimer's Research. I threw myself into it, channeling the same energy and strategic thinking that had built my company into building this new legacy. I was no longer Carol Miller, the victim. I was Carol Miller, the philanthropist, the advocate. My days were filled with board meetings, fundraising strategy sessions, and reviewing grant proposals from brilliant young scientists. The work was demanding and it was deeply fulfilling. It was a way to honor my husband's memory and to create something positive and lasting from something so destructive. My house was no longer a fortress, it was a home again. It was the foundation's unofficial headquarters and a safe haven for my granddaughter. I learned a brutal lesson in those months, that the corrosive power of greed can curdle the love in a person's heart and turn them into a monster you no longer recognize. It's a poison far more potent than anything that comes in a vial. But I also learned something profound about myself. I learned that I was not the frail, forgetful old woman my son and daughter-in-law had tried to make me believe I was. I was a survivor. I was smart enough to see through their web of lies, tough enough to fight back with every tool at my disposal, and resilient enough to build a new joyful life from the ashes of the old one. I learned that age isn't a weakness. It's a superpower. It's a lifetime of experience, wisdom, and perspective that you can draw on like a weapon. They saw a 70-year-old victim. They failed to see the warrior forged by decades of challenges. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, but I felt it was important because I know I'm not alone. Has anyone in your life, a spouse, a sibling, a child, ever made you feel small or powerless because of your age, your gender, or your trust in them? I would be grateful and honored to hear your experiences in the comments below. Your story matters, and your voice deserves to be heard. And if my journey teaches you anything, let it be this. Never, ever let anyone else define your strength or your worth. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories. Remember, you are so much stronger than you know.